and welcome to tonight's episode of Beginner Breakdown. My name, as always, is Alex Moellering, and I'm excited to be talking with you about our theme. Tonight, we're talking about trading and counting and exchanges. So when I talk about a trade, what I specifically mean is essentially an equivalent exchange. So not just a capture, right? So something like this, let's say I capture this pawn on d5, and my opponent plays an extra pawn here. Well, now if I capture this, I've already captured one pawn. If I take a second one, I mean, they can take back, maybe this is a gambit of some kind, but they've given up some material. In some cases, it would just be totally free. I'm not going to be talking really about that. Obviously, if you can win material, that's great. And we might look at some puzzles where that is a factor. But really, we're going to be focusing on stuff like this, right? This type of position, where if I take, you have the option to recapture. And so it would be an equal exchange. We might trade a pair of knights. We might trade a knight for a bishop, maybe a bishop for a rook, or two rooks for a queen. And the question is, when we are in a situation in a game, when we have the opportunity to make a trade, or could create the opportunity for a trade, how do we know whether or not to do it? A lot of things factor into this, the material count, how much space you have. Some of it can be like if one player is more on the attacking side and one is on the defense. So there's a lot of factors that go into this, and we're going to kind of go one at a time. But in order to really evaluate, when we should make a trade, it's fundamental to understand how do we even count the material and know what is equal. Okay, so the first thing is I want to take a look at this position. I actually used this example in, I think, my very first beginner breakdown. So this is a blast from the past. You may have seen it before. I believe that episode is called Surveying the Scene. So as always, you're free to go watch it. It's going to cover some of the same ideas, but it's more just about evaluating a position in general. This is going to be more about counting material and making exchanges. But in this position, it's black's turn to move. And there's a lot to think about. But if you had black in this position, I think the obvious question, the obvious thing going on in this position is that there's a lot of tension and pressure, right? Our rooks, our knight, our bishop are all attacking white's knight here. It's defended by a bunch of things. So we at least have the option to make the exchange in some fashion or other. So the first question when I see a position like this is, okay, we have a capture on the board. Should we make the exchange or not? Maybe even prior to that, we would look and say, if I do this, am I going to win material? So the first stage when we say counting in looking at an exchange is trying to identify how many attackers there are and how many defenders there are. So with black to move, if we were to initiate some exchange, we have a knight that's attacking, a bishop that's attacking, a rook, and then this rook behind it. Once this rook takes, then our second rook would be able to recapture as well. So we have four pieces that are part of the attack. How many does white have on the defense? So one, they have this bishop. They have both of their rooks, so that's 2 and 3, and they also have their king. So this is a 4 versus 4 kind of exchange. And anytime it's the same amount of attackers as defenders, then the defender is going to be the last one to capture because the attacker is the first one to take the piece. So we'll use our number 1, and they'll use their number 1, 2 and 2, 3 and 3, 4 and 4. And in the end, they will be the last ones who make a capture. Okay, so we at least know that the same amount of things are going to make a capture in this case. If we had an extra one, then we might just be winning just because we have too many attackers, they don't have enough defenders. But now that we know they're at least adequate on their defenses, obviously if they have equal or more, then they're going to be fine in terms of that. We also want to look at the quality or the value of these pieces and perhaps the order, right? In this position, if we decide to make an exchange, we wouldn't want to start with the rook, most likely, because then we're going to have a rook traded for this knight. And perhaps white doesn't have to trade all the way down. Maybe they can have more value, losing just the knight and getting the rook. Now, someone in the chat has suggested a nice looking move, knight to c4, which is not an exchange. This is the idea I believe you're looking for is we are attacking this rook, and because it is fully encapsulated on all sides, it cannot move. So this would actually effectively trap the rook. Unfortunately, in this position, knight to c4 is actually a mistake. Does anyone in the chat or in the audience know why? What is wrong with knight to c4? How could white respond and get us into a lot of trouble? Yeah, exactly. So knight to c5. The problem is our move attacks this rook, which is fairly forcing, right? We have lots of videos on forcing moves at this point. Please check those out if you aren't really sure what that means. So we are making a threat, but white can actually make an even more forcing move, a check. It not only moves the knight out of the way to open up the rook, it also forks our king and rook, and now we're actually going to be losing material. If we look at the count, right, we're going to have to move our king somewhere. We can't take the knight with anything, and you can't block a knight because it jumps. So after we move the king, probably to f7 in order to defend our bishop, white has 1, 2, 3 pieces attacking our rook, and we only have 1 defender, which means, again, using our counting, they're going to win some material here. And this rook is actually going to get out of the way, so we don't even get to take that. So we do want to be very careful. One of the benefits to making an exchange is it is going to simplify the position. White is not going to have the option to look for any fancy tactics. In this case, they actually wouldn't be able to because we just get rid of that knight. So the knight that used to fork us is no longer on the board. But also in general, simplifying can be helpful in certain circumstances. We'll talk about that more here. And actually in this position, it's probably the best move. Maybe we lead with the bishop just because it's also a check, so maybe a little more forcing. But we will want to trade all the way down because even though the material exchange was equivalent, if we look at the resulting position, you'll notice that we can count up what's left. We have 1, 2, 3, or sorry, white has 4 pawns, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawns. We are 2 pawns ahead. Our king is slightly more centralized than our opponents, and we can kind of pick and choose one of the sides to go to and clear out, and most likely we'll be able to make a queen before our opponent and win the game because of that. So we can actually see that all the way back in this position. Before we make any of the exchanges, we can count up and see, oh, it's going to be all equal in the end, but we also want to count the overall material, right? So these pawns, these knights and bishops and rooks and everything, and we can see that black is up these 2 pawns, which means we're going to want to simplify. Okay, so this is kind of just an introduction of some of the things we're going to want to look at when we are deciding whether or not to make an exchange. But now let's go into the more kind of basic idea of the material point value for each of these. If you're not familiar, we have a kind of general system of how many points is each thing worth. Chess is not a game about points, right? It's a game about checkmate. If I have given up all of my pieces and can still checkmate your king, it doesn't make a difference what I have or what you have in that case. The game is over. But most of the time, games are going to come down to trading off a bunch of pieces and going into an endgame where one side has slightly more material and is able to win the game with that extra material. And so we have a point system that helps us have a general sense of how much value we should give to each piece or pawn. The pawns, we generally say, are worth 1 point apiece. The knights and bishops, we say, are about 3 points each. Rooks, we say, are about 5 points each. And queens, we say, are about 9. And the points are, again, relative to the value of the piece. And the value of the piece is relative to the power it exerts on the board. So consider a pawn, right? It's only able to move forward. It can only attack 1 space forward on the diagonals. So it's limited in both its movement and its attacking potential. Pawns obviously have enormous value near the end of the game when they can get to the end of the board and promote. So it does change over time, and we'll talk about that. but at least at the initial position and for most of the chess game, the pawns are going to be the lowliest things. You are not so worried about losing them or trading them off. Knights and bishops are next. Knights are more limited in their movement, right? They can't go all the way across a board in any straight line like the other pieces, but their unique ability to jump over pieces and move in a pattern that no other piece can really catch, allows them some tricky opportunities, right? You can get forks against pieces that normally, like the queen, that normally you couldn't attack like that, purely because the knight moves different than anything else. So that makes it also worth 3 points. The bishop sees all the way across the board on the diagonals, 3 points. The rook up and down all the way across the board, 5 points. And then the queen is as if you put the rook and bishop together, right? All the way across the board, up, down, side to side on the diagonals. She's worth 9 points. So the most valuable piece, save the king, which we don't give any point value to because it's never going to be considered for an exchange. If you lose the king, you lose the game. It's checkmate. So there's no reason to give the point value. The only reason we use points is to help us in these decisions about making trades or captures. Okay, so a question though, given some of that, how come, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit. How come the bishop is only worth 3 points while the rook is worth 5? Right? If we jump to some kind of just position here, this is not a good opening, it's just to give the example. Notice that they control, when they're kind of centrally located, relatively the same number of squares. They both attack all the way across the board in a straight line. Just one of them is on the diagonal, one of them is on the verticals and horizontals. So how come the bishop is only worth 3 when the rook is worth 5? Why does the rook get that extra bump? Anyone have an idea? Why would we value our rook slightly more than our bishops? Even though they both seem to move in the same kind of way. Do you know? So the rook can castle. That's true. The bishop doesn't have any special ability like that. So perhaps that gives it a slight marginal bump. But I would say even in like an endgame, after castling has been done, still the rook is worth more than the bishop. Bishop has limited movement on certain squares. Yeah, so that's much closer to the idea. And Shane Briggs kind of bringing us full circle with the comment, the bishop is actually limited to its starting color. So in this starting position, notice how we have a bishop on these lighter squares and a bishop on these darker squares. We actually usually refer to them as the light and dark squared bishop because no matter how many moves I could get infinite moves in a row, but my bishop can never change colors. So if you are able to put your pieces on the opposite color of my bishop, I'm going to be in trouble. Whereas a rook can change colors. It can hit something on every possible square. So even though in one turn their movement is relatively equal, in the long run, you can kind of play against a bishop in a way that you can't really play against a rook. Okay. To kind of illustrate that, if we look at this bishop, or this example of an endgame, the material is equal, right? Both sides have the same number of pawns. The only difference is one side has a bishop and one side has a knight. But notice how here black, with a light squared bishop, is actually missing basically all of white's pieces. The only piece white has on the board on a light square is this pawn, which could easily be pushed up one. It's just not in any danger at the moment. White has maneuvered most of their pawns, their king and their knight, all to be on a square that the bishop can't target. If it was a rook, this would not be nearly as effective, but because it's a bishop, there's just nothing you can do. So this is why the bishop is only worth 3 points versus the rook. A rook is slightly better for that reason. We also want to think about, again, all of this, the point I'm giving you, the reason we're talking about this material, and this is a pretty basic fundamental concept, is what the material is worth, is all about how can we understand this in the context of when should we make a trade. So consider this position. Let's say it's white to move, and we're looking at the board here. Which side do you like better and why? If you had to play a side here, if you had to sit down at this board and you got to choose whether you're going to play the white pieces or the black pieces, which one do you think you'd have an easier time with? Okay, so yeah, Rob USCF in the chat, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, wants to play white. A few other people saying that as well. King safety is part of it, although with kings off the board, or sorry, with kings off the board, with queens off the board, if you have kings off the board, you're playing a totally different game. But with queens off the board, king safety is not, it's still important, but it's not as critical. It's a lot harder to attack the king without such a heavy piece like the queen. But actually, look at these bishops. Look at how many squares they are controlling and putting pressure on. This dark squared bishop is pinning this knight to this rook. This one is keeping this knight in place, or we'll take this pawn and then attack this rook. But they are just dominating the center, and they're kind of dominating these knights, right? The knights are not able to jump as far. This is what we would call an open position, which is specifically when the pawns in the center of two files, so the D and E pawns for both sides, are gone. They've been traded or taken. And so because it's much more open, the bishops get a huge bump in power. And in this case, the question would then be, so not only do we want to play as white, if you're playing as white, do you want to exchange your bishops for these knights? Maybe in some limited circumstances, like maybe you can make an argument, we'll take this one and double these pawns and create a weakness. But generally, we would much rather have the bishops because they can control more squares, and control is what gives something value. Contrast that with this position. In this position, it's black to move, and black's queen is in danger, so I'll just move their queen out of the way. But without that being a factor in the position. In this case, black is actually a head material. White only has 4, 5, 6 pawns, whereas black has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So black is up a pawn. It's a bishop for knight, queen for queen, 2 rooks, 2 rooks. But in this case, I suspect most people would still say they want to play as white. Even though we're down a pawn, if we really stop and take a look, this bishop is pretty atrocious. We can move this way and control some of these squares, but contrast that with what this knight is capable of. There's fork potential on really all of these squares. Like black would love to play very soon rook to c1, to c8, but then they have to worry about potentially us getting in knight to e7, maybe if we can move this queen around. And this bishop's going to have to stay and guard all of these squares. And yeah, this knight is in this, essentially, if you were black here and you had the option to take off your bishop and take off this knight, you would do it in a heartbeat, because this knight is going to cause you so many problems that this bishop isn't equipped to deal with. So that's one consideration, right? Is how are these pieces going to be able to be used effectively in this position, even when they're equal, right? A knight and a bishop, we both say are generally worth 3 points, but in some positions we're going to favor one versus the other, and that should inform your decision to make a trade. Okay. Something else that I mentioned in passing earlier is the idea of kind of pawns, how they get more value. So in this position, black is up a bishop versus a pawn. So this is a 3-point piece versus a 1-point pawn. But in this position, it's actually basically a draw, because the rooks are equal. The 3 pawns over here versus these 3 pawns is about equal. And with white to move, white's going to play this move pawn to b7. This pawn is no longer worth 1 point, right? Thinking about it that way is not really helpful, because this pawn may only have the ability to move forward 1 square and attack 2, but effectively you should treat this pawn as a potential queen. So assigning it an exact point value is kind of difficult, but at the very least, black, the question you have to ask in this position is, if black does not take this pawn, can they stop the queen from promoting? No. And they need to stop like the back rank, so maybe if they play something like h6 and allow a queen, obviously we can see that this queen is worth more than this bishop, which means that in this position, black's best move is going to be to give up their bishop for that pawn, and make sure the material or the position is equal, where now both sides have the same material. There's not really a major advantage or disadvantage for either player. This is probably a draw. But black is very happy to make that exchange of bishop for pawn, even though the point value system might disagree in general. So we have to be thinking about kind of the pawn's upward mobility as it happens and factoring that into our decision to exchange, right? This would be, I would say this is not only an equal exchange for black, this is actually black's probably trading up because they are much happier to get rid of this bishop and stop this pawn from promoting. Something else to consider is the bishop pair. So a pair of bishops we generally think of as being worth slightly more than a knight and a bishop or even two knights. Because again, think about the way the bishop controls a color complex. It's going to hit all of these light squares here, but imagine we place a second one maybe right next to it. And the amount of squares that these two pieces control together is pretty ridiculous. So let's take a look at this position. This position actually comes from a game from a few years ago between AlphaZero and Stockfish. It was when they were testing out kind of the AlphaZero, I think the Google DeepMind AI, to try and like get a sense of how it could teach itself to play chess. And the technology is maybe a little bit outdated. AI has become more of a resurgence recently, but I think this position really shows something quite remarkable. In this position, it's black to move. And let's first take a quick count of the material. So white has 3 pawns, black has 4, 5, 6 pawns. So black has 3 extra pawns. They both have 2 rooks. They both have, well, white has the bishop pair versus a bishop and knight. So technically 3 and 3. Again, the bishop pair is a little more valuable, but we'll get into that. And then queens. So in this position, black is effectively up 3 points. They're basically up a full piece, and yet black's almost lost for sure here. In the game, what happened is they played knight to d7, which does reveal an attack on the queen, but also attacks our queen. Something we're going to talk about very quickly is when you are ahead or behind, and actually I can just talk about it now. One of the most important factors when it comes to whether or not you want to make a trade is whether you are ahead in material or behind in material. For the side that is ahead in material, so in this case black, making trades is almost always going to help you because you want to work towards simplifying the position into a winning endgame, right? Think about that first example we saw. I'm going to jump back to it really quick. In this position, it's complex. There's a lot of chances for mistakes. But if we can simplify and trade everything down, this is a way easier game to win for black, where we just have 2 extra pawns than this position. And so for the same reason, when we jump to this position, black would be more than happy to trade queens because they're up material. And if they can kind of press this advantage and trade off all the dangerous pieces to their position, they're going to end up with a few pieces or pawns in the end that white just doesn't have, and they're going to be winning. So obviously Stockfish does not want to, or sorry, AlphaZero in this case is white, does not want to go for this and retreats the queen. Okay, now the queen's in danger, and there's not really a lot of good options for it. And so Stockfish ended up playing the move rook to f6. And what's amazing in this position is even though we can take the rook for the bishop, right, 5 points versus 3, in this position, AlphaZero evaluated that the bishop pair, because of how much control and pressure it's exerting on black's position, they actually chose not to take the rook. They thought this bishop is much more valuable. Having this pair of bishops together is way more valuable than just cashing in for the quick material grab. So they pushed the pawn to f4. Black got out of the pin with queen to e7, and now, okay, the rook's not pinned, so now the rook's going to move if you don't take it. And amazingly, AlphaZero decided, yes, I want to take the rook, but not with the bishop, with the rook. AlphaZero, again, thinks this bishop pair is just such a massive advantage. It controls so much space in the enemy territory that it would rather make an equal exchange of material in a position where it's worse in order to keep this pair of bishops. Black responded. I won't go through this whole game, but black played knight to f6. White pushed the pawn again, just trying to break through. Queen to e3, and now AlphaZero sees a way that it can simplify into a winning endgame. It takes this pawn allowing for a trade of queens. Normally you wouldn't want to allow a queen trade when you are ahead in material, or sorry, when you're behind in material. In this case, it's going to work out well because of a nice tactical idea. Instead of recapturing the queen first, we play pawn takes pawn, checking the king. The king moves out of the way. Rook takes queen. And in this position, again, the pawn is too valuable. It's going to become a queen very soon if we're not careful. And so Stockfish takes the pawn and loses the knight. And in this position, now it's the AlphaZero is the one with the advantage. It's 2 pawns versus 4, but 2 of them are doubled. We have the bishop pair against a bishop that is effectively just a tall pawn, and then the rooks are equal. So AlphaZero went on to kind of demolish Stockfish in this game. It's a really beautiful game. But the point I really wanted to emphasize here is the simple point is that the pair of bishops is really, really strong if you can use it in the right way to control space. Again, notice this is a much more open position. There's 1 pawn here in the center on d5, but most of the central pawns are out of the way. And even this pawn on d5 is not in the way of these bishops. So they're just kind of eyeing down, laser focused on Black's king. So that's kind of the short-term point, but the long-term point is with all of this, right? Some of this might seem really basic and fundamental, but understanding the value of our material, whether you express it in the point system or whether you are looking more at the position itself and seeing, okay, I recognize that the rook is worth 5 points and the bishop is worth 3 points, but I would rather keep this piece because it's doing much more for my team. And then again, make the same decision here. This rook is not doing nearly as much as this bishop. So sometimes you will make these considerations, and that will affect how you make trades. And also how you just count material in general. Okay, another major consideration, humans are never going to stand a chance against bots. This is true. But okay, another consideration when evaluating trades and deciding whether or not we want to make an exchange has to do with space. And I don't mean space, the final frontier, I mean space on the board. Notice in this position that white has a lot more space than black. White has effectively controlled the center, right? These 2 central pawns are really dominant, and black has a strong center as well, right, with this pawn chain. But because all of black's pieces are really stuck behind their pawns, I mean, you look at all of these undeveloped pieces, this knight really doesn't have anywhere good to go. I mean, I guess it can go to b6, but it's not really helping out the team over there. This bishop on h7, it has a long scope, but it's not really targeting anything at the moment. And look at all of this room that white's pieces have, right? They can, basically all of this space over here on the queen side, a good amount of this space on the queen side. The reason why space is important is because when you control more of the board and you have more space, like in this position, you generally want to avoid trades because your pieces have more, room to roam around and find good squares to jump to. Whereas when you're behind in space, like black is here, if you can afford to make a trade, especially just of equal value, not even a sacrifice, of an actual exchange or a trade, you're making room, right? Right now, this bishop and this knight might be competing for the square e7. If I can trade one of them off, then now only one of them has to worry about finding its way to this square, and I just have a little bit more breathing room. So when you have more space, you kind of want to deny trades to your opponent. In this example, black played the move knight to e7, white castled, and black played knight to g6, right? Black is looking to trade because these pieces are in the way. This knight is now competing with this bishop. It's still sort of competing for space with this one. If this bishop comes to e7, now this knight's going to have a harder time finding a place to live. So black would love to trade. And actually, trading here is not white's worst option. If we take, we can maybe start to expand with f4, and it's still clear that white has an advantage, especially in terms of the space. We're pressing to play f5 and try and break open, the center and black's castle. But if white is a little bit more patient and plays something like knight h5, these plans don't disappear. We still have the space advantage, and the potential to push forward and attack. But now notice that this knight on h5 is actually doing a lot. One, this knight is now just in the way. It's not really helping because it's not stopping f4. It's not, I mean, I guess it could go to h4. I don't know that that's, again, really doing much for black here. That knight's a little exposed. We can maybe just retreat the bishop and we're fine. But we're also, with this knight h5 move, tying down another piece, right? Black's already cramped for space. And now if this bishop moves, we're going to take this pawn with check. So black's pieces are incredibly restricted. The point here is when you have the advantage in space, generally you want to avoid trades because your pieces are going to be able to have more room to move around the board, find critical squares, attack important weaknesses, and your opponent is going to have a harder time maneuvering around each other. Their pieces are going to bump into each other. Okay, let's talk about another idea I mentioned in the beginning, offense and defense, right? Whether you are on the attack or you are on the defense also radically impacts whether or not you should trade. In this position, it is black to move. I believe we called check and white blocked with their queen, offering a trade. And let me put it to you. Do you think, as black, we should make this queen trade? Why or why not? All right, we have someone said no, keep attacking the king. So that's really important. Yeah, the king is exposed, white's king is weak. This is maybe the most central idea. There's a secondary one, but the critical idea is this is a ridiculous position. White's king is on c5, and we have queens on the board. There's not shelter for this king. It's totally out in the open. So yeah, this is incredibly dangerous for white's king. If we trade queens, there's two problems. One, we have released so much of the pressure of our attack. It's a lot harder now to kind of contain this king and punish it for being out so early. Not only that, but if we actually just look at this, if we look at this full exchange, white's just up a piece, right? White has this extra knight. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 versus 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pawns. We both have 2 rooks, and white has a knight. Now, white's not developed, but their king is more active, which without queens on the board now matters a lot. And we're not developed either. So white's just up a piece. And we can actually see that already in this position, right? With that big trade, we're able to at least win this pawn back. But yeah, white's up a piece. So we don't want to trade for material anyway. But also, even if material were equal, we would not want to trade in this position because white's king is just so open. If you have ideas, what do you think, given that white's king is open, let's see if we can find a way to punish them for being out. What is a good attack we can do? Okay, so I think c takes d6 makes a lot of sense to start with. Notice that this king now is the only piece defending this queen. So we want to force the king to move. Now, if we take, obviously if they take back, we'll just take their queen and win. But what if they go king to d5? Because that's the only other square, right? They can't go to c4. Our bishop controls that. So if we take on d6 and they play king to d5, how can we continue our attack? Let's see. I want to make sure I'm not missing a comment here. C takes d, queen a3. So we can't do queen a3. They have that covered. We could castle. So we have to notice our queen is still hanging, right? We can't do something too slow. If we play c takes d, king d5, our pawn is going to be on d6. So we can't castle. We can't play rook d8 because they're just going to take our queen. So we have to do something very forcing. Oh, I think someone found it. Okay, so someone is suggesting after the king goes to d5, we'll play bishop to b7 check. Okay, so I like that. That does give up the c4 square. So now the king will be on c4. So we take, they play here, bishop check, king moves to c4. What can we do to kind of do the finishing blow in this position to punish white? again, we're going to take their pawn. We're going to check their king. They're going to go to c4. Yeah, Pumpkin the Cat, nice to see you back. It's been a little while. Glad to have you in the chat. Rook to c8, check. So first, again, notice here after we take, the only square they can go to that defends the queen is here. Bishop check. The only square they can go to that defends the queen is on c4. And now rook to c8 check. And the king has nowhere they can go. Our queen covers these squares, our bishop this one. Every square they could go to is taken. So their king will have to leave or their queen will have to step in front. But either way, we will take the queen and in short order win the game. So yeah, the bottom line is when you are on offense, generally speaking, you do not want to make trades. There are some exceptions. If your opponent has like one piece that's holding everything together and you can take it and the whole position crumbles, then yeah, obviously there's going to be exceptions to any rule. I think that's probably the only real principle I give in chess. If there's one absolute rule, it's that there's always an exception, which is a bit of a paradox. Don't think about it too hard. But when you are attacking, trading pieces just means your opponent has less to deal with, and it's easier for them to escape your threats. And conversely, when you're behind, right, if you have a way to force this trade, that's going to be great. And we're going to kind of talk about that a little bit more here. I want to make one note. I've talked about this actually exact position before, not the starting position. That's funny, but I have. But actually, if we play a few moves here, and let's just play some very common developing moves, nothing too unusual. This is something I see a lot. We want to attack this weak square f7, right? Both sides want to point out that this square is weak, but the problem is, in this position, let's make an evaluation. We could make an equal trade. We could take this pawn twice. White will lose a knight and a bishop. Black will lose a rook and a pawn. 3 and 3 is 6. 5 and 1 is 6. So we could make that exchange and it would be an equal exchange. The question is, should we make that trade as white? Why or why not? Okay, Pumpkin the Cat, again with the right idea. Yeah, we're going to lose 2 developed pieces. Not just that. Black has 3 developed pieces, so we're already a little behind in development just because we wasted a turn playing knight to g5, moving this piece twice. But also, after we make this exchange, we're going to have exactly 0 developed pieces. If we go through with this, then we have all of our pieces on the back row. The only thing we have developed into the game is a pawn on e4. Whereas Black has a knight, 2 knights, and a bishop, all in nice central positions. And some people will make the argument, yeah, but look at this king, it's so weak. Okay, that's fair. You have exposed Black's king, but the problem is we don't have enough material activity, right? Our pieces aren't in any position to attack this exposed king. If our pieces were more active, then maybe we could make an argument that making an equal exchange to lure out their king in order to, have some big attack could be justified. But you want to think about what pieces you're going to have left. Again, we are too overzealous here with our attack, trading a bunch of things, and we actually trade too much to make it worthwhile. So in this case, we wouldn't want to make that trade. Okay. This is another type of kind of common opening mistake I see from beginners. We're going to do the same kind of thing, right? Bring out our knights, bring out our bishops, very common opening ideas. And in this position, instead of playing this, what we did before of knight to g5 and attacking this pawn, we already know that's not going to work. In this case, the question is, should we play bishop to g5? This looks like a very natural move, right? We want to develop this bishop, and this seems like a very good square for it, pinning the knight to the queen. So should we play this move? Why or why not? Anyone in favor? Anyone against? This one is a little more subtle than the previous example, but still very relevant. And if you don't play e4, I'm sorry, I'm using a lot of e4 examples. We'll give some d4 love to people next time. But yeah, so what do we think? The idea, I think, is quite strong, right? We want to play bishop g5 because we're pinning this knight, and if black's not careful, we might even be able to play knight to d5, attack the pinned piece, really take control of the center. It seems really strong, but there is a subtle problem, maybe a few. The first thing is anytime you make this pin, whether it's you're white or black, or you're pinning a bishop, or you're pinning a knight with a bishop, what you want to think about is, if I'm forced away, do I retreat or do I take? Because in this position, the benefit to a pin is that we can maybe in the long term put some pressure on it, or we can maybe exploit a piece that it should be defending and isn't. But they can immediately deal with this by playing the move h6. And now we have a real tough question. If we trade, it's even for even, but do we want to be trading? Do we want to give up the bishop pair for, just a knight? So now let's take a look. Username 0416 has a great question. What's the point of h6, right? We're just going to retreat. So yeah, I agree. We probably don't want to take, right? I don't think this is going to get us anywhere. So we retreat. And now, g5. Notice that black has not committed to kingside castling yet. This expansion is totally justified. They're pushing our bishop back. If you want, you can try and make some crazy sacrifice. Most of the time, it's not going to be worth it. So we're going to have to retreat if we don't want to be down in material. Already, that's going to be a risky game if we're not. And just consider, let's contrast this now. Let's say black now plays bishop g4. Well, now, with our bishop on g3, if we try the same thing, our bishop's in the way. We actually can't continue to expand with space. It is not going to be hard for black to just move their queen somewhere and queenside castle and have their king very safe. With some nice expansion on the king side, their pieces are doing a lot more. Now, they're really threatening to play knight d4. This is a genuine threat for black here. Our threats were too slow. We didn't want to trade the bishop for the knight because we don't want to give up a bishop pair and help activate the queen. But we also don't want to get into this position where our pieces, we're stuck without the ability to expand. So yeah, let's take a look at some alternatives here. So let's say instead of playing bishop g5, we play h3 first. Okay, now black castles. Now I think bishop g5 is already a better option. Right? There's a subtle improvement because we're not forced to trade if they play h6. We can drop back, and now if they play g5, I think that is a concession because this pawn was actively defending this castled king, and black can try and play this way, but it is inviting more danger, right? You generally want your king to have pawns in front of it, keeping it safe. And so after we retreat here, we're not in that much danger. I mean, maybe there's some threats of trying to fight forward, but black really, again, does not want to be making trades on the side where their king is going to be exposed. It's probably going to be too weakening. We haven't committed to castling yet, so we can still castle queenside as white here and maybe start to try and break through on our own. So those are some of the things you would want to consider with this early bishop g5, right? It relates to counting and trading because I think if you're going to play this move, you have to know ahead of time, if they just force you away, am I going to trade or not? In some cases, it might be good. Maybe you're going to double their pawns or find a tactical reason in your favor, or force them to try and expand too far and undefend their king. But if you don't want to trade and you don't want to retreat, then you should not play this move. Okay. So that's just kind of one minor note, but I do see it in a lot of opening games. Is there ever reason to play h6 to kick the bishop away without g5 afterwards? Sometimes. Like in this position, even though we can't, like black doesn't want to fully commit to playing g5, h6 I think is still reasonable here, just because we can't really deal with it either way. It's still going to be pinned, but sometimes it's nice to give our king an escape square. Like this is the kind of thing where, okay, now for the rest of the game, you don't have to worry as much about a back rank checkmate. So there are still advantages to it, but you lose a big one, right? One of the main reasons is because you can expand forward. Okay, a few final points. Let's step back and really think, what's the whole point to these points, to these evaluations, right? I want to really break it down so you can always connect to your ideas. At the bottom line, the reason we want to evaluate these material exchanges, whether or not we should make a trade or not, is how it factors into us winning, losing, or drawing the game of chess. In this position, it's white to move. Black is better. They're up a pawn. It is a doubled pawn, but they're up one. But because rooks are still on the board, we can maybe fight for a draw. We can play some complicated moves and try and make it as tricky as possible for black in this position. But there's one move that looks so incredibly natural and just loses almost on the spot. Black's king is more active in this position as well. That's a good point, Pumpkin. Rook to e2 looks like a very natural move, just trying to call check. This is like if you're low on time, we're going to call a check, figure out what to do next. This move is actually just dead lost because now black will play the move rook e5. And black is going to do what they've wanted to do this whole time and simplify. So one of the final reasons to consider equal exchanges, right? In this position, black is not threatening to win material, right? They're just offering a trade. We can take them, they can take us. It's just an equal trade of pieces. This is not about winning material. But it is about saying an equal trade, when we get into an endgame where we can simplify, if we take this rook, then black can recapture with the king or the pawn, probably the pawn just to undouble them. This will create a passed pawn, and we don't have any way as white to stop this. Black will very easily bring their king out in front because their king is more active and help escort this pawn all the way home to become a queen. And because we don't have rooks or minor pieces or anything else on the board to complicate that process, this game is almost certainly lost. I would play anyone in the world with this position as black, and well, some people will try and stalemate me in tricky ways, but at the very least I could get a queen here against anyone in the world. So you really want to consider in these positions, you know, keeping stuff complicated when you're the defender. When you are down in material, you don't want to trade, because if your opponent can simplify into a winning endgame, just like our initial position, in the same way this one, keeping the rooks on the board is just going to make it that much harder. Okay, yeah, if Magnus wants to challenge me to that position and just see if I can't get a queen, I would accept. I'd be scared, but I bet you I could do it. Okay, but yeah, and for those who don't see the idea here, sorry, I should have clarified. The reason we have to make this trade, this is actually a great move from black because it forces a trade. If we move our rook anywhere else, then there's a back rank checkmate. So we can't move our rook out of the way, and we can't move our king close enough to defend it. So any other move, we just lose our rook. So that's the problem here. Black found a way to force a trade of pieces. So be careful with your just willy-nilly checks. Sometimes they can end up costing big problems in endgames like these. Let's look at another kind of simplification example here. In this position, it's black to move, and this might be a little counterintuitive, but I'm going to say, okay, so let's give you the black pieces and see if you can find what you think is the best move here, or at least one of the best moves. Black has a few ways to win because we have a queen on the board, but what would you do? What is probably the simplest way to win this game? And as a note, our pawns are moving this way, and white's pawn is moving this way. So as black, what should we do? So check, there's a lot of reasonable ideas for checks. Actually, I take that back, there's two. We can check here and we can check here. Anywhere else, then we get taken. But we have some checks we can consider. But actually, a few people in the chat, Rob USCF and SugarQBE, not sure how you want that pronounced, but have both said the right idea, is actually, in this position, probably the simplest way to win is to sacrifice the queen for the rook. This is no longer a material exchange. We're not winning material, we're actually actively giving up material, but for the purpose of simplification. Now, this is not a move I would recommend you play unless you have spent enough time to know how am I actually going to win it, right? Because there's still a little bit of complexity here, and if you're not careful, they're just going to win. So you have to be a little bit, planning ahead and make sure you know that this is going to win. But yes, and let's think about why. If we take this rook, okay, they have to take back. We can then take this pawn, so that's not a threat anymore. And now we have two pawns that they have to stop with their king and their bishop. And the question is, can they? Actually, they can't. If we take, king takes pawn, there's really nothing they can do. If they try and bring their king in, then we can start pushing this pawn. If they try and reroute the bishop to cover both, which they can effectively do, that's fine, but they're going to have to pick one. Because whatever move they play, our next move, we are playing either c1 queen or h2, and they're going to have to take it. And then we can move the other one. So for example, say they play something like this. It really doesn't matter which one you go for, so let's just say we play h2. If they don't take it, I'm making a queen here, so they have to take. But then they have given up defensive c1, and I make my queen here. And it should not be too hard for me to find a way to fork the king and the bishop and win a clean endgame. You could also have played queen here, and again, they can no longer stop promotion. So this is the type of example where if you don't see for sure that you're winning, don't do it. But it can be really valuable, especially if you study some endgames, some king and pawn endgames, and know which positions are going to be winning for you and which aren't. Then being able to make those kinds of trades and simplify into a win is really going to help you. And again, in this position, you probably don't have to make that sacrifice to win, but it's going to give your opponent a lot less chances to complicate the position if they have this rook on the board. So username 0416 asking if queen takes e6 is good. I think it probably is fine. The danger is, again, we're still letting them keep it complicated because now maybe they don't trade rooks. We're still probably able to win, or they don't trade their rook for the queen. But if I were playing with white here, I would play some move that doesn't involve trading the queen for the rook, because if I keep this piece on the board, I have a greater chance of making a complication and maybe even making some kind of weird stalemate draw. Okay. Touching on all of this, and that last kind of thought experiment especially, of how to complicate a position, I want to look at a game that I played. This was actually the very first, I think, chess YouTube video you can find me in, was for a different class, the Road to 2000. But I went over a game I played against women grandmaster Anna Sharevich. If you want to see that game in full detail, feel free to go find that video. I think it's called Alex Mollering's 1400 Journey or something like that. I'm not going to go over the full game here, but I managed to secure a draw against her in a simultaneous, so she was playing like 20 people, so it wasn't that amazing. But the only reason I was able to, I was in a worse position. Actually, if we look at this position, she had black and I had white. And already I'm down a pawn. She is up a pawn. But I have created this nice passed pawn. And I thought, okay, if I can continue to avoid trades as best as possible and try and make the position very complicated, then it increases the chances that both of us make mistakes. And the only way I'm going to win against a women's grandmaster is if she makes a mistake, especially when I'm already down material. So this is kind of the opposite, right? I want to simplify the position when I know if I trade everything off, I'm going to win. I want to make it more complicated when I think I'm not so sure about that. In the game, I played the move d6. She played knight to c6. I played rook to d5, attacking the pawn. She traded these pawns. And then she actually made a mistake here. Again, the position is sort of complicated. I'm sort of close to promotion. And she played a very tricky move, knight to e7, with the idea that if I take, she can take my rook, and this rook on e3 is going to cover the promotion square. So I'm not going to be able to promote. So something like this. I can't promote because she'll take it. I can't defend the promotion square because, one, she'll just take the bishop, but also she could just choose to take the pawn anyway. This is her idea, attacking, creating a pin and putting me into a tough spot. Unfortunately, this didn't work out for her because I actually missed a really strong move here. I played the move rook takes b5, which is still okay, but Chess BS, funny name in the chat, said rook to d3, which is actually the best move. It's kind of really cool. I'm attacking the bishop, threatening to just win this piece. And there's a lot of tricks here. So, for example, if you take the rook, well, now this rook is no longer defending this square, so I can take the knight and threaten to promote. First, I'm threatening to take, I'm threatening to promote. And this is a tough spot, right? If you just jump in the way, then I take your rook here. So I'm attacking both of your pieces. This is not a good spot to be in if you are white. So if you don't take the rook, then I'm just going to take your bishop, right? If you just back off, I'm taking your bishop and you're losing material. So either way, I'm doing really well there. So well spotted with rook to d3. But even missing that, right? I took here, knight moves. I still try to keep it as complex as possible, having a pawn almost ready to promote, knight to e5, threatening to take my bishop, and also attacking this pawn. And I found another move to make it really complicated, rook to c5, attacking this bishop. And I think my opponent kind of fell for my idea, thinking that I was a little more of a beginner player. She probably assumed that, okay, if I take, he's looking to just make an exchange. I'll take his bishop, he'll take mine, and then I can deal with this pawn. Maybe just double up the rook somehow and take this pawn and be okay. But my idea was not to win material, right? I'm already down. I'm playing for complexity. So after she takes my bishop, I play the stunning move rook to c8, pinning her rook to the king. She no longer can take my piece, or my pawn. This is actually a really big problem. So she plays bishop a5, defending. I play knight takes g4, so I recapture my, she took my bishop, I took back her knight. She plays rook e7, and here once again, I kind of missed the winning move. It ended up being a draw. The line in the game I played rook d1, defending the pawn. She called check. I moved my king to f1. She played king f8. I brought my rook up to d6 with the idea that I am now attacking her bishop and undermining the defender of this rook. She attacks my knight. I move my knight. She played pawn to g6, and we agreed to a draw in this position. I had seen in my head that if I take this bishop, she can play takes here, and I thought this was going to be where I'm up a little material, but against a grandmaster, I didn't really want to play that game. I could have easily won if I had found this move, though. This is very, very strong. Regardless, that's a little behind, a little off topic. The winning move here, I'll give you 30 seconds or so if you want to try and find it. White to move and play better than I did. See if you can find the winning move here. It's actually basically two moves. If you can find two moves, then you can win the game, but it's really, really tough. While you're thinking about that, I want to give the kind of closing recap that the whole idea of trading and counting material is that we want to be able to properly evaluate what our pieces are doing, what our opponent's pieces are doing, and whether or not trade is in our favor. If our piece is doing more than our opponent's piece or has the potential to, then we don't want to trade, and vice versa. And the factors that play into that are whether it's an open or closed position, how much space we have, whether we're attacking or defending, whether we have the ability to simplify into a winning endgame, and so on and so forth. Okay, a few people have suggested some moves, and the best sequence is actually to play rook takes d8, forcing bishop takes, and then to play the stunning move, knight e5. If you take my knight, then I will go here, threatening to take your bishop with a back rank checkmate, so you can't deal with the pawn. You're going to lose the bishop whatever you do. I take it, and then I just move my rook out of the way, and you cannot stop me from moving to a queen. And if you play anything else, like f6, then I can still play immediately rook to c8. I'm defending here, so you can't take. I'll just take back. And again, there's really nothing you can do. Takes, takes, king out of the way. And here you can play a nice tactic like rook to f8, drawing the king down in order to get a queen. So kind of fun example at the end, but the point for all of that is you want to simplify into a winning endgame if you are ahead, but if you are behind, then complicating the position, avoiding trades is generally going to be in your favor. Thank you so much for joining me for this class. Hopefully it's been helpful for you to think about counting material, evaluating positions, and knowing when to trade and when not to. And please stick around for our Grandmaster's Choice lecture with Grandmaster Igor Novikov. Hope to see you all again soon. Take care.